Hello, welcome to My Karate, My Life podcast. This is episode 3, and I am Chrissy Howard. As suggested, this podcast isn't just about karate. There are also glimpses into my life. That is deliberate. Simply because both karate and life have impacted me equally and are both worthy of celebration. So today I wanted to take you back a bit to before karate. A time before any of that structure, discipline and confidence ever existed. All the things karate has given me. I was born in 1973 in Southend-on-Sea, Essex. At home actually, which feels quite different to how things are done now. And from what I've been told, it wasn't the easiest start. I had the umbilical cord wrapped around my neck, so things were a little bit touch and go, and intervention required. I don't remember any of that, of course, but looking back, I do sometimes wonder if that beginning shaped more of me than I realised. We moved not long after my birth to Pitsea in Basildon, and I can still remember my address now, 54 Delhi Road. My parents made sure of that. They used to repeat it to me over and over. Should I ever get lost, I would at least be able to share that with whoever might stumble across me. To be fair, getting lost was quite likely in those days, because I had a lot of freedom growing up, the kind you don't really see now. I'd disappear for hours. Sometimes it felt like the whole day, off into the woods behind our house, climbing trees, making up my own little worlds. I was very happy in my own company. That's important to know because I was also incredibly shy. Not just a bit quiet, I mean properly, deeply shy. Social situations were really hard for me. I didn't feel like I needed anyone outside of my family, and if I'm honest, the outside world felt quite unpredictable and a lot overwhelming. That carried into school. I hated it. I hated school from day one. It felt loud, chaotic, just too much. The noise especially. I've always been really sensitive to sound, and back then it would completely overwhelm me. But instead of anyone really understanding that, I'd get told off. A teacher even once called me stupid because of the overwhelm I experienced, and a headmaster at another school announced in front of the whole assembly that I was ridiculous, again because the experience of overwhelm. It's not a surprise to me that I never grew to love going to school. Anyway, I learned to just get through it as best I could and avoid it whenever I could. Academically, I didn't connect with classroom learning at all. I've always been more hands-on, more practical, but that wasn't how things were back then. There was no choice or freedom to choose or have options. You did what everybody else did. And because of different things going on in my life at the time, my education was quite disrupted. After about 13, I barely had any formal schooling at all. I left with 0 qualifications. And for a long time, that made me feel like I was already behind before I'd even started. But what I didn't know then was that everything I thought was holding me back was actually shaping the path and quite possibly leading me towards the path, that path being karate. And that's where things start to change. For a long time, I felt like I didn't quite fit anywhere. I was small for my age, very quiet, always trying to stay under the radar, sometimes literally keeping my head down just to avoid being noticed. The world felt loud, unpredictable. Like I was constantly trying to work out what was expected of me, and I usually got that wrong. It was my nervous system. Some people are just wired to feel things more intensely. Sounds, environments, energy, it all comes in stronger and faster. And when you're a child and you don't understand that, the world can feel overwhelming rather than exciting. There's actually a theory that early experiences, especially stressful or uncertain ones, can shape how sensitive and alert your brain becomes. Almost like it's trying to protect you, but sometimes it turns up the volume way too high. And that was my experience. So I wasn't broken, I was just highly tuned to everything around me. I just didn't have a way to process it yet. But then, karate, and everything started to make a bit more sense, because suddenly there was a place where the rules were clear, where I knew exactly what was expected of me. And there's something quite profound about that when you think about it. As humans, we're constantly searching for meaning, for structure, for a sense of order in what can feel like a very chaotic world. And karate, traditional karate especially, offers that in its purest form: ritual, repetition, respect, and clarity. From the outside, it might just look like people punching and kicking, but from the inside, it's a framework for understanding yourself. I still remember that feeling walking in, even from the very first bow. Something just clicked. It felt different once I had bypassed my earlier difficulties. Training wasn't really a struggle for me. It was more than okay. I could do it. I'd always liked working hard, even as a kid, but karate gave that effort a purpose. It wasn't just movement, it was movement with meaning. And in that environment, there were no blurred lines. Everything, everything was clear. You stood there, you bowed here, you did it again and again until you got it right. And that suited me perfectly. Because for the first time, I wasn't guessing. I wasn't trying to read people or second guess expectations. It was all there, simple, direct, and honest. Almost like, almost like truth in its most basic form. And then the dojo itself. It wasn't anything special to look at. In fact, it was disgusting. It was pretty rough. The mats had that smell of old sweat and disinfectant, and the air was always a bit heavy. The lighting wasn't kind either. But you know what? I loved it. There was something real about it. The sound of feet hitting the canvas, the snap of the clean kicks and punches, the sharp ki cutting through everything. It had its own kind of magic, and it grounded me. And that's another interesting thing. Movement like that, repetition, controlled breathing, it actually helps regulate the nervous system. It brings you back into your body, back into the present moment. I didn't know any of that at the time, of course. I just knew I felt better there than I did anywhere else. Before, not for long, it was a small dojo. I've said this before in a previous episode. It was tiny, so it wasn't long before we outgrew that space and we moved to a bigger hall. I remember really missing the old one, despite the ugly smell. It felt like home. But it didn't take long before the new place did too. And then that filled up too. More importantly, though, something in me was changing. Very slowly, but very clearly. I started to come out of myself. My confidence was building. My karate was improving, actually starting to look respectable, and people began to notice. That's the quiet power of something like karate. It doesn't shout. It doesn't force change. It just asks you to show up again and again. Until one day you realize you're not the same person who first walked through the door. Something else entered the picture. Something I hadn't expected. Politics. At the time, the group I trained with was part of the Shotokan Karate International, SKI, and the leader was Asano Sensei. I was completely captivated by him as a child. But not long into my journey, one of his students, Aidan Trimble, broke away. At the time, I didn't really understand it. I think most of us didn't. It was all a bit confusing. And as it turned out, based on a misunderstanding that wouldn't fully come to light until many years later. But that moment, that was my first real glimpse into the fact that karate wasn't just about training. It was also the first of many breakaway and divisions that I would experience within the karate world. That was my first glimpse into something really important. That even in something as disciplined and structured as karate, there are still human elements. Ego, miscommunication, division. And maybe that's the deeper lesson. Karate doesn't remove the human condition, it reveals it. And how we choose to navigate that, well, that becomes part of our training too. So as I look back on that time now, what stands out isn't just the practical side of karate. That wasn't just what I was learning. It was who I was becoming. A quiet, unsure, overwhelmed child, starting slowly to find her footing, not through words, not through school, but through moments of movement and discipline, and something that felt like truth. As I kept showing up, as I kept working hard, I began to form relationships with other students. We laughed between drills, we swapped tips, we trained together outside of the dojo, laughing and joking about our aches and pains and injuries. And it was then I noticed that my instructor started to take more interest in me. At first it felt flattering, the kind of attention I wasn't used to. It wasn't long, though, before I was spending more time with him and his family outside of the dojo. They became an extension of my own family. I stayed over at their house, helped look after their children, even joined them on holidays. For someone who had been shy and withdrawn, this was a kind of belonging I'd never known before. It felt safe and it felt important. I didn't question it much. I was simply grateful for it. Looking back, I can see that I put my trust in them completely. At the time, I thought that trust would last a lifetime. I could not have imagined that one day it would be tested and broken. I couldn't have known that the person I looked up to the most in my early karate journey would one day be the reason I could no longer train under that roof. But that's not where this part of the story ends. For now, I was still in the glow of belonging, still learning, still believing that the bond between student and teacher was unshakable. In the next episode, I want to take you further into that journey, because this is where things really begin to deepen, not just in karate, but in understanding what it actually means to walk the path. And trust me, it's not always straightforward.